Okay. So I want to welcome everybody and thanks, Tina, for arranging this. I'm Vivian Epstein, speech language pathologist, and I'm going to go to my slides in a minute, but I know that not everybody wants to show their faces on, but I'm hoping occasionally I can call on a little interaction. So if you're going to be brave enough to show your screen and respond to a few interactive questions, I would really appreciate it. Makes for a much more enjoyable session. So let's go to the screen and just a very little bit about myself. I'm a speech pathologist trained in South Africa. I'm sure you noticed by my accent, not quite Canadian sounding, but I've been here many, many, many years, as Susan and Tina well know. And I've been a community speech pathologist for many, many years, and as well have been the speech pathologist for the SAM Aphasia program for a number of years as well. And I'm involved in the Burlington Hamilton Community Stroke Network. And I am very excited to welcome you all to the aphasia training today. So let's just move on. And I want to be sure that I'm making sense and people can really, follow what I'm trying to say. So if anything that I've said is not quite clear, please do raise or just put something in the chat. Tina will be monitoring the chat and we'll be sure to try and address any lack of clarity or any questions. Also, just wanted to let you know that we are planning to have a debrief follow-up session, and that will be on the 23rd of March, I believe. It's Thursday, Tina, from 1 till 2 o'clock. It'll be an opportunity as a follow-up to today's pretty quick and dirty introduction to supportive conversation. So we can talk about that in further detail, but please to note the date, and hopefully you'll be able to come and discuss some of the questions that might have arisen from today's session and what you trial in between, questions that might come up between now and then, and just reflections and thoughts about the training itself. So our objectives today are to understand that today we're learning about aphasia within a participation model. So not about aphasia, but how people with communication difficulties actually are able to function or participate in their environments. We're going to then talk about the rationale and the components of supported conversation techniques. So these are the actual techniques that we want to review today to make conversation more successful. We'll then look at those techniques and see how we apply them with people with aphasia. And then at the same time, think about, well, we understand how this works for aphasia, but what are the implications for other communication difficulties that we might encounter in our day-to-day lives or in our working lives? So the title of the session is Communicating with Patients or Clients Who Know More Than They Can Say. And this is really fundamental. It's based on the Aphasia Institute, and there are a lot of references at the end of this session. And as you can see, this is all adapted from the Aphasia Institute. But the important thing to hold in your mind is that we're trying to think of methods to communicate with people who know, but are just not able to get it out. So that would not be a person with advanced dementia, just to make that clear, and we'll be getting into that shortly. So what is communication? So if you think about that for a moment, communication is broader than language. You can see that language we have underneath the title communication. Communication involves facial expression. You can see my face, you can see my hand gestures, You hear the intonation as it rises and falls to make a point, and body language. So it's a much broader method of communicating than language. Communication involves the interchange of messages in a dynamic way. There's a speaker and a listener, and the sharing of messages in and out and back and forth, sent and received, received and sent. So what is language? Language is the complex formalized communication system, or the method that we use in order to communicate. So I thought, for fun, just for a moment, I'm going to stop sharing. And I wonder if anybody here speaks a little bit of French or some French. If you want to be brave and raise your hand, it would be really fun. So anybody willing to do that? Does this mean nobody speaks French or nobody's willing to, to do it? All right. Do I see somebody daring to say I speak a little bit of French?
I speak a little bit of French. I can understand more than I can speak.
Okay. Can you tell me how you pronounce your name?
It's Rebecca.
Rebecca. Okay, because I see a number of names there. Okay. So I'm going to put here. I'm just scribbling on my board. So wait for me 2 seconds and write and read. Okay. So here we have my board. Okay, I'd love them to be color-coded, but Rebecca, when it comes to speaking, you're in Quebec, you're, let's say, Montreal. How well could you get about? What would you give yourself out of, let's say, out of 5? What would you give yourself out of 5 as far as your proficiency in French?
I'd say maybe a 2.
Okay, so you've got about a 2 out of 5 when it comes to speaking in French. What about when somebody will answer your question or try to give you directions? How well would you say you understand what they're saying to you in French?
Maybe about a 3.5.
Okay, so you're a little bit stronger in that, 3.5 out of 5. And how well could you write an email or write an essay? What would you give yourself out of 5?
That's interesting because I have a little bit more time to think about it because it's not on the spot. So maybe about a 3.
Okay, so and if you didn't have much time, if you quickly had to write a response, what would you give yourself?
I think it would be the same around a 2.
Around a 2. Okay, I'm going to
2.5. Yeah, just the momentary, like the moments that you have, even though it might be slight, just to write it down, it feels a little bit easier. But yeah, still less for expression. Yeah.
Okay. And what about reading comprehension? If I said to you, okay, take the newspaper and what do you think of this article? What would you give yourself out of 5?
It does depend on the complexity, but I'd say probably about a 3.5 or a 4.
Whoa. So I'm going to give you a 4. Why not? I'll raise your mark. Okay. Okay. So
now you're going to give me something complex.
There you go. So look at this. Language isn't just one thing, right? Language has 4 functions: speaking it, understanding it, writing in it, and reading with it. And they can be differentially stronger functions or weaker functions. When it comes to Rebecca, when she's in Montreal, Rebecca does better in her understanding and reading side, which is the message going in, comprehending things better than you are able to speak or express yourself in writing. So Rebecca, when you are in Montreal or a French-speaking country, you have a sort of you've got a bit of an expressive aphasia. Do you realize that?
Yeah.
You're a little stronger in your message in right?
Yeah.
In your receptive is relatively stronger. Your expressive is definitely weaker. So you've got a mild expressive aphasia. Think about that.
Yep.
And when you're there, it's still Rebecca, and you know exactly who you are and what you like to do and where you plan to eat and what music you're going to listen to. But you do have this language barrier.
Right.
And that's kind of a little bit of what aphasia is like. It's still Rebecca, but Rebecca in this new language environment has got different abilities and strengths, right? In language. What about if we all went to Japan? How many people are perfectly good in Japanese? Anybody proficient in Japanese? Natalie said no, and I'm hoping Jane says no, and Tina's just smiling through her mask. Okay, so let's say when we go to Japan, we know exactly what we plan to do, what kind of a vacation, how much money we want to spend, where we want to go, but we cannot speak it. We're trying to find out where's the nearest restaurant, where are the washrooms, where's a decent hotel that's sort of affordable, but we don't have the speech or the speaking ability. If somebody tries to then explain it to you, as much as you know what you want, not able to understand that language, the Japanese. Somebody tries to write it down for you, or get right. So let's say you're trying to write, I need to, but you don't know how to write in Japanese. And then somebody might give you a brochure or a flyer, but you don't read it. So when any of us were to go to Japan, we really have a complete loss of language ability in that environment. And that is pretty much the experience of a global aphasia. So it's still you. Nothing really has changed. You know just what your values and belief systems are, and yet language is no longer accessible. So we're today going to really learn more about aphasia and the aphasia experience. But hopefully that really explains to some extent or gives us the feeling of what the experience is of a person with aphasia and how important it is to understand and appreciate that it's still the same person, but we need to learn how to overcome the barriers to connect to that person. So let's move on here. What is aphasia? Aphasia is a disorder of the use of language. In other words, the way we express ourselves or the way we comprehend ideas through words. So it might be that we're trying to, if I say to you, what is this? And you say, book, book, book. And I say, okay, is this a book? And you say, no, book, book. So you know what you want to say, but you've got this difficulty with getting the word out. Or it may not just be the word, but it might be, oh, I want the, I want the, so there are different levels of the word itself, or putting words into a combination, or getting quite far, but they're not being able to quite finish off the sentence, or not even being able to get this word at all, or just silence. So that is where the word level or beyond has gone with the ability to express. Similarly, it could be the words that are not being understood or comprehended. So you might say to me, can you close your eyes? And I might look confused. And then you show me, close eyes. So I'm not comprehending, although again, it's that me in Japan, I know what's going on here, but I have had something happen in my brain that has taken away my ability to understand. Or I might understand where is the pen, but it might be much more complex information that I'm not able to process. So adding words, complex combinations of words or sentences might be too difficult. But aphasia is essentially a language and word problem. Okay. And as a result of the language disorder, the ability to have conversations is affected. So today we're not worrying too much about exactly understanding aphasia from a technical point of view, but we understand what does it do to our ability to communicate and then to function in our programs, in our interviews, in our therapy sessions, in our supports, in our social conversations, or whatever it might be. Causes of aphasia: stroke, brain injury, usually involving the left side of the brain. And remember, today we're learning about aphasia, but aphasia is a template to understand all forms of communication difficulties. So you might have worked with people with Parkinson's or with multiple sclerosis or with different other neurological conditions that affect the ability to talk, to speak. And whatever we learn today can be applied. But aphasia, because it can affect all parts of language in different ways, is the best way to really understand how to deal with various manifestations of communication barriers. So sticking with aphasia for today, roughly these are the numbers: 15 to 20,000 strokes per year. You can see this number, 40,000 to 50,000 strokes in Canada each year. So we're talking about big numbers here. And did you know that at least 1 in 3 clients with a stroke will be diagnosed with aphasia? So let's try to think about the impact of a communication difficulty. If you're having trouble getting your message out, right, as Rebecca had explained from her experience, for a person who has an expressive aphasia, difficulty talking, what does it do? It means they cannot share their thoughts with you. They cannot share their ideas with you. They cannot share a message with you. They'll have difficulty asking you a question. Perhaps there's something on their mind they need clarified, but cannot because they don't have the words to actually ask a question, or unable to have conversations. Writing difficulties: if you cannot write, you cannot express your thoughts through writing, ideas, messages, texting, emails, completing forms, surveys we send out, electronic forms that need to be filled in. So we need to be mindful. If it's a getting message in, and you can see I've color coded these, so the reds are about getting messages out for today. Trouble with expression, either through speaking difficulty or through a writing difficulty. Or is it the message going in difficulty, which is the comprehension difficulty? If a person does no longer understand what they're hearing, they might have difficulty with following questions we ask, taking a history, giving instructions on how to do an activity, spoken information, or just following a social conversation. And if there's difficulty with reading comprehension, of course, but we need to think about impact. We're thinking about the impact on ability to participate. In this case, without ability to read, you cannot follow handouts, instructions, written information, or just the pleasure of reading books as one used to do, magazines, or just scrolling through the internet. And for today, we'll just talk about primary progressive aphasia because we've got quite a few people who work in aphasia programs, and we all will come to at times meeting people who do have a diagnosis which includes aphasia. It's called primary progressive aphasia, which is a form of aphasia at some point, but it actually starts differently, not from stroke, and it's a progressive condition, unlike stroke, which is occurs and does not change, but we expect it to move in a positive trajectory. But a progressive PPA will get worse over time until most likely it becomes a global aphasia and severe dementia. So, for a moment, let's close our eyes and I'll read to you. Imagine if the last sentence you say tonight is the last full sentence you will say for the rest of your life. The words of Stephen Goff, transliterated, person with aphasia. So just think about the impact of the experience of having aphasia. And for those who've come with looking for the neurological backgrounds or the correlates here, when I talk about a message out difficulty, which was the talking difficulty where just cannot get that out, that is the non-fluent type of aphasia or the broker's aphasia, and typically comes along with writing difficulty, while the green, trouble getting the message in or comprehending or reading information and understanding what it is typically what we call the fluent aphasia or a Wernicke's or a receptive sensory aphasia. So imagine if this were you. You're intelligent but cannot understand what people are saying. You know what you think but cannot express your thoughts. You feel that people think you're not able to make your own decisions. No one discusses complex health issues with you. So this is the experience of people with aphasia. And we also know that communication problems can interfere with the way we deliver our services. And that's why we're all here today, to see how we can embrace people with aphasia and feel comfortable to be inclusive and to have them be part of our programs that we offer or our services that we offer. So we need to get information from people. And of course, they want to give their information directly, not necessarily a family member to say how I'm feeling or what I am going through at this point. So that ability to get it through directly is going to really impact and make a huge positive difference in how the person experiences life with the communication barrier. Getting informed consent. How well do we do that? Are we sure that people really understand the consent process? And how are we making sure that we can demonstrate that full comprehension? And is it true consent that we are getting? So that's something you may want to think about. We won't go into too much detail, but something we can debrief on or talk about at the next session. And all education that we are giving about health or self-management needs to be provided in a communicatively accessible way. I just spoke to one of my clients, very anxious to see his doctor because he's afraid that he's not going to be able to get the information he needs or take it home with him at the end of his session. So moving on. Just to appreciate then that our model today is a live participation model. That yes, the person has a deficit, yes, the person has speech impairments, but my focus is to go with the impairment and to find a way for this person to participate in spite of that. And that should be my focus from day one, first appearance in the hospital. These strategies of engaging a person actively as best as possible, right from day one, right across the care continuum and beyond. We, of course, are complying with the AODA accessibility for people who have communication barriers. So just as a person in a wheelchair cannot enter a building because it doesn't provide ramps or elevators, What does the AODA say? We need to adapt the building. We need Braille for people who have visual deficits to optimize access. So just as a person in a wheelchair requires ramps to get around, similarly, a person with aphasia needs a communication ramp in order to communicate. Aphasia Institute terminology. And the purpose today is that we all together will be trained on how to be that communication ramp. So complying quickly with stroke best practices. It requires that all health providers be trained about aphasia, recognizing it and knowing ways to support aphasia. We should appreciate that longer stays in hospital result and poorer outcomes of ADL, understandably with communication barriers. It impacts quality of life in many cases, mood and social outcomes, and impacts quality of life, relationships, vocation. Think about that. And it's been associated with a general decreased response to stroke rehab and increased risk for mortality. And treatment to improve functional communication really should include training communication partners, which is all of us, as well as really anybody who we meet with a communication barrier. And the information we provide, very importantly as well, needs to be adapted in a stroke and aphasia friendly way. And we can talk about that later as well. So our goals today are to increase access to each of our services, whomever we are, and we're all from different places, and to make us more efficient and effective communicators, optimizing communication, making it accessible. And just a picture here of some of our lovely clients sitting in conversation group with a couple of medical students attending for training. So moving on now to supported conversation training for adults with aphasia, SCA, supported conversation. This comes out of Evidence A research, and that's where we're going to be delving right now. These strategies apply, remember again, for people who know more than they can say, who want to say something, just like that person in Japan, just like Rebecca when she's in Quebec, and just like a person with aphasia. People with aphasia are intelligent, know what they want, are competent, and can make their own decisions. So this is a handout from the Aphasia Institute, and you can see it really is an aphasia-friendly document. There's minimal language here. You can see the check marks, which are not language-based, and very easy to read. And this is something we should keep in mind when we are creating our own handouts. And just to share something that was created by our own clients, we know aphasia is a term that's not understood and not recognized by the majority of the population. And because it's so hard to grasp what it means, our clients together put this infographic together where they all came up with terms, and we have here you can see the APHASIA for aphasia. Able people have hard access to speech. Intelligence is not affected. Moving on now to the techniques themselves. So the techniques essentially are divided into two parts. Number one, and what the Aphasia Institute will say is the most fundamental and most important, is acknowledging the competence of the person with aphasia. So what do we mean by that? Techniques to make that person feel that they're treated respectfully, that they are seen as an intelligent adult, despite the fact that they might not be able to say what they're thinking and are often assumed to be less capable as a result of the communication difficulty. Then we'll look at how we reveal the competence by actually adapting how we speak to others, how we communicate with others to help them get the message in. The green is receiving the message, to make us more easily understood? And what do we do for people who cannot speak or express themselves? How can we make it easier for them to get their messages out? So to help, we're going to look at a video together. And we're going to see, and I want you to all jot down on a little piece of paper that you might have with you. And I hope you also have your handouts ready for later on when we start to meet with the clients. But here I want you to look at this video clip of a doctor before he was trained at the Aphasia Institute. And I want you to see his interview with Jerry, the client with aphasia, and see, did he make sure that he was understood? Did he make sure that Jerry could get his message out? So did the messages go into Jerry, out from Jerry? And did he acknowledge Jerry's competence? So let's take a look at the video briefly, and we'll have a quick conversation about that.
But let's now look at what happens when Jerry is talking with a conversation partner who has had no special training. We will see Jerry being interviewed by a young doctor who volunteered to help the Aphasia Center develop their training programs.
Can you tell me your age? How old are you? Just for my sake, to get a feel of what you can understand. Do you think that you can understand everything that I say? How long has it been now that you've had difficulty? Is it more than 2 years? Is it more than 5 years? Could it be less than 1 year? So it's going to take a lot of patience. Yeah. Tell me, do you live here in Toronto? Okay. Can you say the word dog?
Okay. So a quick stop share. How many people enjoyed some reason? How many people enjoyed that interview? Hands up if you did, or hands down if you did not. Okay. Did the doctor, was he a kind, caring doctor? Hands, thumbs up or thumbs down? Natalie doesn't think so. What do people think? Was he a kind, caring doctor, or yeah? Okay. So, okay, I'll tell you because we don't have too much time, but I'm going to tell you what I think. I think he was a kind, caring doctor, but he had no idea how to actually communicate. Somebody is nodding. I don't get your first name, but I see nodding. And I think most of us in the field of helping tend to be, have good intentions, tend to want to help, but don't always know exactly how to do it. And I think this was exactly the situation that the doctor was in. And some of the things that he did, if we just want to review that, he asked a lot of questions. Did people notice that? Does anybody want to say something that's really on their mind? Because I'm very happy to listen to one or two. Anybody want to add anything?
Yeah, it's a lot of open-ended questions instead of some yes, no's or choices.
Okay. So we've got a lot of open-ended questions, Rebecca. So you'll see it's much easier to have yes and no questions, but you can see we can set up an interaction with a person that feels like an interview. It's much easier to be in charge and asking a whole lot of questions. We stay in control. We ask all the questions. The person doesn't need to respond. And but that doesn't make for an enjoyable interaction of where it's a shared back and forth of conversation, which is really the point of today's training. So how do we make it more balanced? How do we share? And also, how do we ask the questions? But as you said, some open-ended questions with no ways to respond. Some yes, no questions, but in this case, Jerry was not even able to say yes or no. So even those did not work so effectively. My final question as we move on, do you think Jerry enjoyed this? How did he, what was the experience? If anybody wants to shout it out, what do you think was the feeling that he had?
I think he was uncomfortable.
He was uncomfortable. How many people would agree that Jerry was uncomfortable during this session?
Vivian,
Yes.
Cheryl also has her hand up. I'm not sure if she's would like to speak or
Cheryl,
comment.
please go for it. I think Cheryl's muted. I think everybody's muted unless they unmute. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting very choppy messaging, so I had to shut my camera off.
Okay.
So my question is, his body language in that video kind of exemplified that he seemed like he was getting frustrated, like, that he was not able to effectively convey his messages. So I just wanted to know with aphasia, is that common because they understand what's being said to them? Then their body language, like if you see them exhibiting like kind of frustration, like, their face in the palm of their hands or putting their hands on the table, like seeming like, rest that they can't get their message through, that might be kind of signatory, like signifying to us, like, okay, they're having an issue with being able to express themselves. Is that fair to say, or would that be an assumption that we should not make?
That's the most important thing, because we talked about communication being much larger than speech, right? Than language. And when language is gone, we have to be able to be cognizant of what else is part of communication: facial expression, gesture, just the response or the effort at responding, the kind of feeling of despondency is all communication. But we just got to look for it and attend to that. So gestures, expression, all of that should have been up at the forefront of the doctor. But he probably was anxious, nervous. He's new at this and didn't quite know how to adjust. He's used to doing interviews as part of his work, finding out what's wrong with the patient, a very one-sided interview. But you can see when we say acknowledging competence, whatever you feel about the doctor, you saw that dejected look on Jerry's face. And if the doctor had acknowledged the competence, which is the primary thing here, and said, this must be so hard for you. I'm sorry, I'm not able to really be very successful in the way I'm having a conversation with you. Or I'm sure you've got so much you want to tell me and I haven't made it easy for you. It would have been a whole different experience, as we'll get to see. So excellent question. And I hope I've answered that for now. And if we could move on, let's go back and move on. And hopefully, because time always flies, we'll see if we can get through what we need to and then get further conversations going. So Cheryl, and for everybody else, acknowledging the competence being the most important part of supported conversation is letting the person know how you are aware of their frustrations, their anxieties, fears, and we say it within a normal, natural way, using an adult voice. So let me show you, for example, how it might look. Let's take you through this little video clip, examples that are from the Aphasia Institute that I will share with you. So let me just get this one. And take notes and see what everybody's observing.
Frustrating? Yes. Huh? You'd love to tell me all the details of your trip, and I'd love to know. Yes. Well, let's go for second best. How about I give you some choices? Yes. Okay.
So did you see there? Frustrating, and I know how hard it is. Let's go for second best. And she talks about giving some choices. So she's going to be writing down various choices that he can choose from to make it easier for him to actually respond. And we'll get to that as we move through this training. But I hope you were able to see from that the way in which she tried, and she really did make him feel comfortable to move on in spite of the difficulty, respond and say yes or no to the question. All right. So part one is acknowledging the competence, and part two is revealing the competence. So once, let's say, the doctor had made Jerry feel more comfortable, we know this is frustrating, we know you have aphasia and it's hard for you, and I am going to try and do the best that I can to make it easier for you. The next part is, how do we support the language? How do we help and make sure that if Jerry, and we don't know all the details of Jerry, but if he's having difficulty following some of it, are we making sure that Jerry is following and comprehending it? Are we then also making sure that if Jerry has something he wants to say or express or get out, are we making sure that that is possible, that he can respond? And number three, are we checking and verifying the accuracy? Because if you said to me, is your name Vivian? And I said, no. And you said, wait a second, that's a little confusing. If you check, is your name Vivian? And I say, no. Okay, we've got a mismatch. We've got we've got a nod, and we've got a verbal no. What does that mean? What's a good idea is go to my chart or go to, no, is my name Vivian? You all know it is. So what you're seeing there is a difficulty with yes and no's. So if you had said to me, have you had any falls recently? And I said, no, right? And or I said, let's say, have you had any falls difficulty? And I said to you, no. If you were not looking, you might have missed that I have had falls. And you might, just by taking notes, have incorrect information. So number one is just remember, aphasia is a breakdown of language, of words. Yes and no are words just like all other words. And just like a book can be a pen, and a pen can be a book, and a boy can be a man, and all words can be confused or not at all, we have to check and verify that what we have thought we have heard from the person is actually accurate. So very big is the verifying and checking the accuracy of the message. So moving on now, we're going to quickly learn about ways to support understanding. So if a person is having difficulty comprehending, just as Rebecca did when she was in Montreal to some extent, what do we do? So this is not rocket science, but let's think about the different techniques. Use shorter, simpler sentences, expressive voice. Is the message clear? So if I said to you, since you had the stroke and that fall when you had to go into the hospital, have you noticed any changes in your walking? That's a very convoluted, difficult sentence. So think about how you're using your language. How are you phrasing? How are you asking a question? How clear? And it's not about the simplicity of content because we have an adult person we're speaking to, but it's the simplicity of the language, which takes a lot of practice. And we really do need to practice over and over about how to explain complex information in simple language. Talking a little slower, so not too slow. We do not process language like that, but we process it in units of meaning. For example, this morning, I went to the store and I finished my shopping. Instead of this morning, I went to the store and finished all my shopping. So you can see ways of making the comprehension easier by using these various techniques. And adding gestures that can augment or help with the understanding as well. So let me show you. Let's just move on a little bit and we'll look at some examples. A very important part of helping people understand is writing down keywords. And I'm sure my colleagues here, Susan, and if anybody else is on, would say that when we're talking to people with aphasia, one of the biggest parts that we do is writing down keywords. As we speak, we're trying to write the keywords to help the person follow the conversation. Just the most important words as we speak to help keep track, because there's so much redundancy in language that by just seeing the most important elements written down will really hone in to the meaning. Using let's see, picture resources is also very, very helpful in addition. So let's say I've given you, if you look in your handouts, you've got pictures there, you've got days, you've got the months, you've got the days of the week, and there are countless resources that you can use to support your conversation as you're going through. And then, of course, find out if the person has a communication book. So let's for a moment think about using keywords. So let's see, for example, let's say I'm trying to teach you about a new diagnosis of diabetes. And I say, have you ever heard of diabetes? And the person says, no. Could any of you, do you think, explain what diabetes is in a simple way? Just raise your hand if anybody can do it really simply. Or thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever you'd like to tell me. Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Did you hear me? Is it Robert?
Robert, I did not hear you.
I'm saying, is anybody here able to explain what diabetes is in a simple way? Somebody becoming diabetic, is it an easy thing to explain or is it complicated?
High blood sugar.
Okay, so there you go. But so let's say the doctor says to the person with aphasia, you know, you've got a recent onset of, you've got diabetes. Thank you, I see high blood sugar. How are we going to make sure that this person who's not understanding understands A, what it is, B, how it's going to affect them, C, how they have to treat it, D, how to manage it, E, how it's going to impact their lives, without being able to understand all those components necessarily, and then being able to ask all the questions about it. So what I might, for example, do is write down the topic. We'll see this shortly. We're going to be talking about diabetes. So always a pen and paper in your hand. Okay. Do you know what it is? Just a question mark can say, do you know what it is? We are not writing. This is not a writing event. This is a supported conversation event. Do you know what it is? The person says no. Okay. All right. It's complicated. But this is about, and you know, I'm keeping this with my terrible drawings here, we're talking here about, let's say, we're talking about sugar, okay, like sugar that you put in your coffee. But this is about the sugar, and here's some gesture, blood, the blood sugar, right? So then I might just add, so sugar, but blood sugar. I've done the gesture. I've got my information here. I've got simple words, not phrases or sentences. The problem with diabetes is that the blood sugar can sometimes be too high, and that is a problem.
Right.
Or sometimes the blood sugar can go too low. I haven't any words there, but universal symbols. And these two are a problem. What are we going to do about that? Right? Question mark. And then I might come up with some options. I might draw a picture of medications. So you could take some pills, possibly your doctor will give you some pills to try and help you control the blood sugar. Let's say you might need insulin. So we might write, you might need some injections, right? So you might have something like that. You might need insulin injections, and you have that down. And then you would get another piece of paper to continue the conversation. And then you might say, do you have any questions? Now, if I couldn't speak and I had a question, how would I ask a question? But by creating this very good setup to help the person understand it, will then allow the person to go back and say, or what was, oh, I didn't make it clear about the injections. Let's go back to that and talk about it. So by having a really good document there, which you can keep for further reference, allows the person not only to follow it and track it, but to come back then with questions. So keep it going for the duration and give it to them because they might want to review the important information or share it with somebody else. How do you go back to a family member and say, the doctor told me that, A, B, C, D, E, when you don't have the language? Or am I worrying? Is it going to affect certain aspects of my health? So we have to remember that people with aphasia are constantly thinking, despite the fact that they don't have language. And we have to anticipate and account for the questions that might come up and make those possible, as well as make sure that the understanding is good. Okay, so moving on now to, let's have a picture. We'll just look at one more.
Who do you have in England, Martha? If this is you, okay, this is you. Yes. Who do you have in England? A son, a daughter, grandson, what do you have in England? Yeah. Okay, a son and a daughter you have. Are there any grandchildren? Yeah. No. No grandchildren? Yes. No grandchildren.
So did you see there some of the ideas? Picture resources if needed, or you could always draw a picture if necessary, if you don't have it, but we will talk about resources and ways that you can set yourself up for a successful conversation. Okay, so having pictures with you, as you saw with me, can help to follow the conversation more effectively. So just in summary, to make sure that the person is understanding your language, because it's not about not getting things, but it's about not understanding what you're saying through the medium of language. Shorter, simpler sentences, expressive voice, gestures that accompany it. So before you had your stroke, or now, how are you feeling? Or do you worry about the future? because let's talk about that. What's on your mind? Use gestures that can be easily understood, use keywords. Remember, we showed in the diabetes, you write down the main words in a clear, bold print, and if needed, pictures to illustrate the main topic or ideas that you're discussing. So now that we know how to support understanding, let's think about how we support the ability to get it out. So we don't know with Jerry at this point, we didn't really discuss it, if we think he's got the type of aphasia where he has trouble getting it in. We don't know if he's having trouble comprehending it, but we certainly know he has trouble getting the answers out or speak with his speaking. So how do we help a person like Jerry actually get his message across? How can he answer a question? How can he tell you something? Does Jerry have a way to ask a question? We've seen people who are nonverbal who are worried about what will happen they're worried about their children, because we're all human. We all have worries. And if you don't speak, you still have all those human anxieties and questions you have. But what if there isn't a way to get it out? So that is our responsibility as communication partners. So using yes/no questions is, we talked about it earlier and somebody mentioned that before, really helpful, because all you need to do is answer yes or no and we can get a large amount of information as long as the person has a reliable yes and no answer. So for me, I had the kind of aphasia where I was mixing up my yeses and nos. So there we have to think about what to do, because without a reliable yes and no, we really don't really know what the person is thinking. And beyond that, we need to know that the person has a way to respond. So in the case of somebody who can say yes, no, we could say, have you had a stroke? Yes. Let me check, was it 2 years ago? Yes. Is there anybody else in the family who's had a stroke? No. So we're all good. But for people who are not able to answer the yes, no, what are we going to do? So there are ways, of course, I'm sure you're all very familiar with the thumbs up, thumbs down for people who, is your name Vivian? No. So thumbs up and a nod. Those nonverbal gestures are pretty affirming that the answer is yes, my name is Vivian. Another way to do it, of course, for people who are apraxic, might have difficulty manipulating that thumb up and down. So I have found what's helpful is to have yes, no written down, and I think you'll see that or have seen it already in some of our examples. So whenever you're having a conversation, write yes, no, or have a yes, no card that you can get the resources from the Aphasia Institute if you need it. Very easy to just create your own on a piece of paper. And for those people who are not reading because they've lost reading ability and are apraxic, cannot move, I've found that sometimes it's just helpful having the check mark and the X, right? So you can start, is your name Vivian? And I say, no. You're onto something. Were you born in South Africa? Do you live in Canada? Do you still live in South Africa? So then you've got your alternative ways of finding reliable responses to yes, no. But in general, how do we make sure the person has a way to respond? So let's have a look. We'll look at this example. Have a look at the techniques that Lorraine, the speech pathologist, is using.
So we're talking about Sandy. Yes. And I want to know, is she still working? Does she still work? No. Oh. Okay. Let's get this one correct, right? Does Sandy work? Yes or no? No. Yes. Oh my goodness. Are you telling me that she has retired? Yes. Yes. Really? So Sandy's retired?
Yes.
Wow.
So you can see without the verifying and checking, because it was hard for the client to say yes or no, but when the speech pathologist checked, because she assumed the wife Sandy was working and assumed that he should be saying yes, but in fact, he was trying to say no, and the speech pathologist was not aware that the wife had retired, but through this support, the client was able to let her know that indeed his wife had retired. So important that the client knows we have to find ways to get into the mind, right? To understand what it is they're trying to get across. For people who have less severe aphasia, because we're going to see a range in our work experiences, in our life experiences, and today we have clients coming along with a range of different types of aphasia. But for some, it might be the 20 questions. Oh, you've got something to tell me. Instead of guessing, was it about the balloons that they're shooting down in the US? You know, we could jump to conclusions, but it's probably more polite and appropriate to start with more broad. Is it something in the news? Is it something about you wanted to tell us about? Is it something about your family? And once we get the broader topic, then it's those 20 questions. Is it in the news? You might get a map. If the person is good with maps, I've given you all handouts of maps. I'm looking for my own, but I've been able to have wonderful conversations where a person has been able to show me a country in Europe where all of a sudden, you know, they're able to show me exactly where a particular story happened, and then we're able to get into the details and the more specifics in the question. So we've got here, for example, is it about the US? And of course, when these slides were made, is it about Trump? Moving on, we might be able to say, can you give me a clue? Can you describe it? Can you show me? They might have something that they could bring, that they have to share with you, or a gesture. Can you show me what it is that happened? Visual resources. So I've given you in your handouts, but is there anything? You might have a communication book from your speech pathologist. You might have a book. You might have a newspaper that you wanted to share. You might have a calendar. So I might say to you, I'd like to come and see you next week. Can you give me, what is a good day for me to come? And the person isn't able to say. So I might give the days of the week, and the person might point to Wednesdays. And you might say, well, okay, well, Wednesdays seem to be the best day for you. Let me see, I'll book you in on a Wednesday. So by using the resources, you're allowing for that back and forth, the person who doesn't speak to actually contribute, to share what's on their mind, so that we have what didn't happen in the jury interview, and as best as possible, balanced and shared interaction, which of course is going to be enjoyed much more by both parties. So think of resources, and think resources you might find useful in the work you're doing, the activities you're doing, whatever the situation may be. We can look at this one briefly. Let me see if I've got a better one. Let's look at this one.
How many children do you have? How many kids, Arthur, do you have?
Well,
You, how many children do you have?
well, yeah, yes.
Good, that's great, you've got a son.
So you can see this person is trying to write. You might find people try to do some writing, even if it's not that easy.
Good, all right. So Arthur, you have a son and a daughter. You've got two children?
Yes.
Okay. Now, do they live in England?
Yes.
see.
Yes.
Okay, so are there any grandchildren?
Yeah.
No. No grandchildren?
Yes.
No grandchildren. So you went to see your son and daughter in England.
You can see a nice conversation, a lot of information learned just by having the resources. Now, you want to get information from somebody who's not able to tell you. You might say, what would you like to do this afternoon? Or what are the most important things you want to get out of therapy? Or what are your most important goals when you go home from the hospital? Whatever the circumstances may be. And the person knows exactly what they want, but isn't able to generate it because they have that type of Jerry's aphasia, getting it out, message out, expressive aphasia. So you might then kind of think, project, what is it possibly that this person might want to say? And of course, the better you know them, the better you will be able to generate and write down some words. So you might write down, do you think you might want to work on, for example, let's say, if it's an OT, do you want to work on, you might put down stairs, you might put down washroom, okay, you might getting out of bed, and always writing other, because we never know what's in the person's mind. Maybe they have, something that we haven't thought of. And allow them to point to, was it any of these? And the person might say, it's about the stairs. And you might be surprised that the stairs is a priority, but perhaps if they can do the stairs, it means they'll be able to get back home. So it might be in their eyes more important than some of the other activities that have been deemed important by the therapist or by the doctor or by another person. So let's just see here. We've got one more example to come up. Have a look at offering written choices here that the person might be able to use as a response.
Arthur, are you an optimist?
Yes.
Are you a pessimist?
Yes.
Or are you something in between? Or are you just a neutral kind of person? What would you say? Now this is all fitting in. Right. You would have to be an optimist if you thought they were going to win.
Yes.
Okay. What do you think our chances of the Stanley Cup, is it with an E?
Yes.
What do you think our chances are of ever winning the Stanley Cup?
Yeah.
Would you give us a 30%, 50, 70, 50?
Oh, okay. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry, interrupted that one. But you saw there that she gave all those options, right? And you know what? I took away the most important part. Let me get it back there.
Ever winning the Stanley Cup?
Yeah.
Would you give us a 30%, 50, 70, 50?
Yes.
So you're not such an optimist, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
So you can see how much you can get the personality from a person if you really are creative, and ways of getting, how do you feel about something? You can put percentages, how much pain do you have from 1 to 10, etc., etc. And finally, make sure that you write down important information. So when your next visit is, what your findings were, so that the person has them, that they can share it with somebody else. So let's just, and time. For a person with aphasia, it really takes time to process. It takes time to get the message out. People might need a moment to think, to organize how the words need to go. So be respectful of that and really step back and watch and allow time for that person to respond. They will appreciate it. And I'm sure you'll see that as we start to meet with the clients shortly. And finally, just a quick summary asking, so how do we make sure we help a person get their messages out, a person like Jerry? A quick review using yes, no questions, Make sure the person has a way to respond. So writing yes and no down in large print for pointing. One thing at a time, one question at a time. If the person isn't able to respond, they could gesture, they could point to something, they can show you pictures if necessary. Write out some written choices if you think it would be helpful because the person cannot generate them. For example, you have some kind of pain, and then you might write, what kind of pain? And you might put some choices. Is it numb? Is it tingly? Is it something else? So that they could better describe what kind of pain they have and that they can point to that, and allow time for the response. And then the verifying, check and verify that you have understood that person. It's not that the Vivian did not have a fall because my yes and no's were mixed up. It's making sure you have followed what the person is trying to tell you, that you don't get the wrong information. So let's very quickly watch that the doctor and the Jerry video after the training. Then I think we'll have a few minutes break, Tina, as we bring in our clients and move on to part 2 of the session. So let's quickly look at the doctor who's had his training at the Aphasia Institute. And I want you to see if he improves with making sure Jerry gets the message in, understands everything, that Jerry can get something out, and that the doctor ensures and verifies that he has understood and makes sure that Jerry feels competent. So let's quickly watch this one and then we'll start our break.
To highlight the difference training can make, here once again is Jerry and the same doctor after the doctor had participated in the training program.
How old are you, Jerry? You're, try to remember, are you more than 60 years old?
Yeah.
More? Or down? More. You are 60?
Yeah.
So, Jerry, you're 60 years old. No more, no less.
Yeah.
Okay. Some questions I asked you last time didn't work very well. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Didn't work well. So this time it's going to work. Okay. Something happened to you years ago to cause the communication problem.
Yeah.
Was it a stroke?
Yeah.
So your right side doesn't work very well. Do you write with that hand, with the right hand? All right. You live here?
Yeah.
In Toronto? In Toronto. You know this book better than I do then. But now
Yeah.
you live in.
Yeah.
So you live in Toronto. Do you live in North York? West.
Yeah.
So you live west
Yeah.
of Toronto?
Yeah.
Are we talking about Etobicoke?
Yeah.
Etobicoke. Okay. That's where I'm from too.
Yeah.
Once again, why is it that Jerry looks so much more competent when he is interacting with a trained conversation partner? We believe that specific training in the techniques of supported conversation has improved the doctor's ability to acknowledge and reveal Jerry's inherent competence.
Great. Okay. So all of you got to see that. Hands up if you thought it was an improvement in the little interview there. Yes. And you saw, I don't know if you could see, writing up some of the techniques, slowing down, the writing down the key words. You've had a stroke, he wrote that down. Gestures, Jerry used gestures to show which hand was affected by the stroke. He also used gestures to show where he lived. That was expression. I live up there. And then the doctor figured out exactly that they lived in the same place. And using pictures and resources. So if any people have pictures that they might want to use or resources they have around, use them. They will be something helpful for the conversation. What a difference in the interaction, the enjoyment, the pleasure of people communicating with one another, as opposed to a very unbalanced, uncomfortable interview style for both. I would say the doctor was probably as happy as was Jerry, the client. And I think I'm going to hand you over to Tina, but I'm excited to let you know we have 5 clients from our SAM Aphasia program who generously will be joining us on Zoom, and will be here for you to have little practice sessions, to talk to them. I've got in your handouts a little guide, if you're stuck, you're not sure what to say, you can use those types of for questions. But they're all wonderful people, generous, and I think they'll be very happy to share a 15-minute interaction with you. So let me hand over, and if you need any of your pages, look through them quickly. We're going to have a few minutes break. Your resources that might be useful. You need pens and paper that you can hold them up to the screen as I was doing. Tina, I don't see you on my screen.